All right, James, are we ready to start then?
Yeah, I've opened the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Secretary, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks so much and good morning, everyone. My name is Wade Crowfoot and I lead our California Natural Resources Agency. I want to welcome you to what is our 15th meeting of the Oroville Dam Citizens Advisory Commission. As you know, this commission was formed through a state law change a few years ago to ensure that agencies are working together to ensure the safety of the Oroville facility and to ensure that members of the public and folks that are interested understand just how we're doing that. We have a full agenda today, and we have about 2 hours. We have 2 hours for our meeting. We're going to conclude by noon. I want to start with some housekeeping items. As always, the meeting will be recorded and posted to the commission's website for your reference afterwards, or if you want to share publicly. Public comment is an important part of the meeting that takes place at the end of the meeting, and members of the public who are joining are muted right now until the public comment period. And when you want to provide public comment, our web host will allow you to unmute to provide the verbal comment. You can also submit questions throughout the meeting via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. While you can submit questions through the meeting, we'll address those written questions submitted through the Q&A button at the end of the meeting during public comment. We are back on the Zoom platform in part to enable our colleagues from Scripps in San Diego and the Army Corps of Engineers to join and present to us today. I do want to say we look forward to meeting back in person in Oroville in 2024. I'm in Los Angeles today, and unfortunately, my schedule requires me to leave this meeting at 11 a.m. And I'm thankful to Carla Namath, our Director of the Department of Water Resources, for taking over to facilitate the meeting when I need to leave. I believe Assemblymember Gallagher, our co-chair, also has another commitment at 11 o'clock and needs to leave then. So before we begin, as always, I'll ask our colleague Tara Alpa from Kearns and West, which helps organize these meetings, to complete a quick roll call of commissioners.
Thank you, Secretary. So I'm going to take a roll call. If you are a designee sitting in for a commission member, please make sure to state your name clearly so we capture it in our notes and on the recording. I am going to call you not in the order that's listed on the screen. Sorry about that. So keep your ears open. All right. First of all, Secretary Wade Crowfoot for the California Natural Resources Agency. Thank you. Then Senator Brian Dolly.
Here.
Thank you. Director Carla Namath.
Here.
Thank you. Matt Teague.
Here.
Thank you. Lori Najura.
Here.
Thank you. Lieutenant Commander Mark Stokes.
Here.
Thank you. Assemblyman James Gallagher. Okay. Mayor David Pittman. Vice Mayor Eric Smith.
Here.
Thank you. Supervisor Todd Kimmelshoot. Supervisor Bill Conley.
Here.
Thank you, Supervisor. Commissioner Robert Bateman.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Oscar Marin.
Here.
Supervisor Seth Furr. Supervisor Matt Conan. Supervisor Dan Flores. Sergeant Brian Evans.
Here.
Thank you. Lieutenant Brandon Spear.
Here.
Deputy Andre Lacone. All right, we have reached a quorum with 12 commission members represented.
Thanks so much, Tara. Appreciate all that you do to help us keep these meetings so well organized. So I want to thank our commissioners for helping us shape today's agenda. Over the last 15 meetings, we've delved into a number of topics relating to Oroville, flood control, water supply, and of course, community safety. Today, we're going to be completing a deep dive into forecast-informed reservoir operations, where we use science and better information collection to optimize the use of reservoirs across California. I'm really gratified to have Marty Ralph, who is a key leader on FIRO here in California, to present. And I want to thank Carla Namath and Department of Water Resources for really leaning in and ensuring that we have investment to enable this optimization of our reservoirs. So Marty is, of course, from Scripps Institute of Oceanography Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes. And we have key leaders at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers joining us today as well. We're going to talk about FIRO, and we're also going to talk about the development of the water control manual that governs the operations at Oroville. And I want to emphasize at the beginning of our meeting the state's role in the development of an update to that 1970s Lake Oroville Water Control Manual. This water control manual is a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers document that describes how our Department of Water Resources must operate the Oroville Reservoir for flood risk management. We are thankful that DWR, along with other agencies, participates in the Corps' process to provide relevant input about the system's operational flexibilities and constraints. But it's important to note that, as in all of these water control manual update processes, ultimately all decisions about the manual are made by the Corps of Engineers. Our agenda today also reserves time for Commissioner Bateman to offer his perspective on objectives for the water control manual update, as well as for the rest of the commissioners to share their own thoughts. And then after these presentations and a discussion, we'll hear from our colleagues at DWR about the winter operations preparations for Oroville. And then, of course, as always, the last portion of our meeting will be reserved for public comment, with each member of the public enabled to talk for 3 minutes and ask questions and provide comments. Before I hand it over to presenters, just a few process points, which is really important to maintain continuity meeting to meeting. At the July meeting, our meeting planning team presented a restructured action item tracker to our group. The action item tracker is really designed to ensure transparency around points or to-dos that get brought up in each meeting to ensure that they actually get followed up on. After our meeting, we all received a list of items completed and items being added to the tracker. We asked for your input in order to make any corrections in advance of this meeting. So the resulting version, updated version of our action item tracker is now posted to the Commission website. And then after this meeting, you will once again receive a list of items we believe were discussed and talked about at this meeting, and new items added to that action tracker. So again, it's really our effort to ensure that these meetings actually are well organized and result in important follow-up. So thanks for your patience as I went through all that, and I'll turn it over now, as I always do, to Director Carla Namath for just any sort of high-level updates or observations she has leading our Department of Water Resources.
You bet, and thank you, Secretary. 3 quick updates. In a follow-up to our last meeting, there was an ask about how well our piezometers and other instrumentation at Oroville and on the gated spillway performed. I know we've got a lot on our agenda and we could get into a very detailed conversation about that, but the summary is all of those piezometers performed as anticipated. In terms of the data that they generated, there was no sort of unusual readings around pressure under the concrete spillway. All of that is undergoing further analysis that we'll do to understand how that structure is functioning writ large, and we can provide a more detailed update on that, Secretary, when we have our next presentation on dam safety here with the Commission. But I did want to just take a quick touch on that because we are monitoring that. And of course, last year was a really big year for water in California. And it's great to be able to have this kind of information and have opportunities to share it with you all. The second thing I wanted to mention was that the California Water Commission held their last meeting on September 20th up at Oroville. They took the tour that many of you have also taken of the facility. It's really important. The Water Commission has, by virtue of the 2009 legislation here in California that sort of restarted that commission, they have an important oversight role for the State Water Project. We provide many presentations to them on our asset management plans, how we're approaching climate adaptation, how we're approaching forecasting at the State Water Project, and certainly dam safety. So that was a good opportunity for those folks to understand the facility a little bit better and understand how it fits downstream with our flood facilities. And then finally, on that note, I did want to just congratulate the city of Oroville and Sabufka for their work on about 1.2 miles of levee improvements. I know there's some ongoing activity with the Corps in terms of additional funding to continue those improvements, but it's really terrific to see that progress made, and hats off to the city of Oroville and Sabufka. Thank you, Secretary. Those are my updates for this morning.
Carla, those are great updates. Thanks very much. Also, before we jump into the agenda, we typically allow an opportunity for our assembly member and senator to share any opening thoughts they have. As I mentioned, our commission exists because of the leadership of Assembly Member Gallagher and Senator Nielsen and Senator Daly and others. So I want to turn it over to Senator Daly or his staff, Bruce Ross, for any thoughts they have, and then turn it over to Assembly Member Gallagher if he's been able to join us. Senator Daly or Bruce, any thoughts that you want to share as we start the meeting?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to continuing to have these every month. I want to let the folks know that Bruce Ross has been my designee, our district director for the district, and has been following. So I'm on today for a little bit. Appreciate all that you do, Secretary Crowfoot, and I'm glad to see the process is doing what we should be doing, moving forward. So thanks again.
Thank you very much. And for Bruce for being such a consistent part of this. Greatly appreciate that. Not sure if Assemblymember Gallagher has been able to join. All right, we'll integrate him into our discussion as he's able to join. So now we're going to move into the meat of our agenda. And as I mentioned, the first presentation will be on this forecast-informed reservoir operations. And again, this whole conversation today is all about the updated operations of Oroville that Army Corps of Engineers will finalize. And informing this is science that's really emerged certainly since 1970, that's allowing us to optimize the operations of reservoir for flood control purposes, as well as water supply. Marty Ralph, as I mentioned, is the director of the Scripps Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes, and a key partner in applying FERO to our water systems in California. After we hear from Dr. Ralph, we'll hear from Jennifer Fromm at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and she'll give an overview on the Army Corps' Water Control Manual update. Again, this important update of reservoir operations. And her presentation, she'll share the Corps' objectives, and then also be really clear about opportunities for stakeholder and public input into the process. And then after Marty and Jennifer present, then we'll open it up to commissioners for a discussion. So Dr. Ralph, thanks so much for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Secretary Crowfoot. I'm trying to share screen now. Is that okay, or how do we do this?
Yep, it looks good. We see it.
Marty, I'm currently sharing the slides for you, so you just go ahead and tell me to next slide it, and I'll move them for you.
Okay, got it. All right, well, real honor to be here, and it's a great honor to be part of the state of California, doing innovative work that is the nature of the state's culture to be looking ahead. So thank you for the opportunity to share this. So forecast-informed reservoir operations hinges on accurate forecasts. And as the essentially chief scientist of FIRO program overall, and as the co-chair of the FIRO viability assessment at Yuba Feather, we call it, which includes the Oroville Dam, and also as the the guy who basically wrote the book on atmospheric rivers, I want to share with you a little bit about how FIRO works, how vital the forecasting is to it, some innovative things we're doing on the forecasting. I'll also show a bit of a timeline about the FIRO process in general, the output of which is really aimed at producing inputs for water control manual updates. And Jenny Fromm will be covering that in depth. All right, so let's see. All right, so if you go ahead to the slide with the colorful dots, here we go. We'll get rolling on the process here. So go ahead, and there's this variable shows rain gauge data over decades about how the precipitation annually varies from year to year. And the pink areas back east means it basically hardly varies much. A super wet year isn't much wetter than a super dry year. But you look at those green and blue dots, and the super wet years are double sometimes the super dry years, or even more, even triple. So there's no place else in the country that deals with this kind of extreme in annual precipitation. Go ahead. And these variations from year to year are driven largely by the storm type that we've been working on, as discovered essentially not long ago. And it's called atmospheric rivers. And if we get enough of them and they're big enough, we end up in a good position for water supply. But if they're too big and too frequent, we end up in flood. And if we don't get enough, we can slip down into drought. So that storm type is the linchpin for FIRO working or not working in California and frankly, much of the West. Go ahead. How do we develop the FIRO viability assessment? That's our jargon for what we're doing. Is use of forecasts viable in a safe and appropriate way at a reservoir? And each reservoir is very different from each other. And this is a process that applies across many reservoirs. And we're in the process of going through, we've got about 4 or 5 underway in California, 6 right now, I think. So the little pyramid on the left is our sort of strategy diagram, where we have S&T as science and technology, meteorology, hydrology, ecosystems, and water resource engineering innovations are at the foundation of our FIRO viability assessment. We then demonstrate it through what we call a preliminary viability assessment, or PVA, and sometimes it's possible to take those results and plug them into a request to the Corps to do a deviation, either a major or minor deviation, to test out the ideas. And then we cap it off with a final viability assessment with all lessons learned. Go ahead. In the case of the Yuba Feather system, this is our steering committee, and you can see representatives from DWR and myself there, and Yuba Water and Army Corps of Engineers. So we've got a really good team of executives and leaders, knowledgeable folks working together very closely to develop this. Go ahead. Once we carry out those analyses, we get to the point where it's possible to do interim operations, potentially with a viability assessment that's positive, and with the tools developed, and with a deviation request in place and maybe approved by the Corps. Go ahead. But this blue dotted line represents, that's our FIRO sort of a domain, program-wise. Go ahead. And that feeds into the Water Control Manual Update. That's WCM. And there are special studies like NEPA and that sort of thing that have to be done for WCM update process. Go ahead. And this is just a very schematic of a water control diagram where we see the winter empty space there. And then we also see the possibility of keeping extra water after a storm. In case there's no more storms coming or no big ones to worry about, that water would then be able to help improve water supply reliability. And then there's also the potential to release water ahead of a storm. That's the bottom red line, to make space for the extra big storm. Go ahead. And it's possible through improvements in forecasts over time that the amount of flexibility that FIRO enables for a reservoir can be increased as forecast skill improves. Go ahead. And a key concept here is that we work as a partnership between research and operations so that we develop, invent, test, and prove out these methods in a careful and highly considered and very rigorous way. Go ahead. The timeline essentially here, the green part is the main part I want to emphasize, is we developed the work plan, which is a several-year plan of work, and then we did the preliminary viability assessment. Essentially, we're heading towards the final viability assessment early next year. So the results are converging, and we still have more work to do, and I'll summarize that at the end. Go ahead. I'll leave that for Jenny. Go ahead. Now let's dive into the weather business here, because this is really what makes or breaks FERO. Can we predict these atmospheric rivers, well enough to enable a heads up? So if extra water is kept, after the previous storm for an extra day, can we count on having good enough forecast with enough lead time that water could be released ahead of a storm that might be a problem, or if there's a possibility to release ahead otherwise? This graph is a lot of data here, but basically each blue line tells us a measure of the lead time we have, how far ahead in time we see the evidence of these atmospheric rivers coming or not. And each one of these is a different storm over the last 6 years. And the orange line shows that on average, we've got about 5 days lead time. And I want to emphasize that this is a pretty rigorous, how do I say rigorous? It's a very strict measure of whether or not we're able to predict these. And in the case of the tools we've developed, it's even more strict. So just keep in your mind, basically, we've got about 5 days lead time in predicting ARs. Go ahead. How do we get that lead time? Well, part of it is by adding extra observations over the ocean. We call this Atmospheric River Recon, or AR Recon. I've led the development of this, and it's a partnership with NOAA and the U.S. Air Force, who have the aircraft that are schematized there. And the orange thing at the bottom is essentially the little 3D object there. It looks like a slug, sort of translucent. That's the AR. And we're sampling it with dropsondes, where we drop these little sensors and they measure the temperature, wind, and pressure and water vapor in the AR very precisely. And that helps make sure that the forecast model has the best starting point to make a forecast of the landfall of the atmospheric river, which is where we see the heaviest precipitation. Go ahead. Here's a picture from Mather Field last year. We had 4 Air Force C-130s on station for a couple months. And then we also had an aircraft in Hawaii from NOAA. And we flew a total of 39 missions over the period of the winter. And our target is having, hopefully we'll have full resources over time as the nation invests in these aircraft more, to do this as much as 60 times a winter between November 1st and March 31st. Go ahead. And the reason we do this is because it makes the forecast better. This diagram is from my colleague, who's also leader of the AR Recon work, but he's in the operational side in National Weather Service, in charge of the global weather model that the nation has. And each of these figures on the bottom shows the precipitation. On the left, it's the observed, and that purple area circled is the heaviest precip in the storm in the Sierras. The second one is when we include the data that we collect with the aircraft, the forecast looks darn good. And when we didn't, you see on the right, it just missed the storm. That's sort of an extreme example of it missing in a very visual way. But we see on the order of 10% improvement in the forecast skill on average across all storms based on our methods here. And for reference, that's the equivalent of what it would take a decade of weather model improvement to achieve. So this is really a major leap in forecast skill improvement relative to what's been possible elsewhere in the country. Go ahead. What is an AR? I didn't realize I hadn't really shown a picture once. I wanted to slide this in there. This is our New Year's Day storm. Welcome to 2023. It came in with a bang. This is the water vapor in color, and you can see it lined up towards the coast, and those arrows are the winds at 5,000 feet, pushing that water on shore. It goes up over the mountains, creates rain and snow. Next slide, or next, go ahead. This is what the AR looks like when we calculate the vapor transport, which is this amount of water vapor the AR is pushing along. And the color, the brighter the red, the stronger it is. That's a strong AR right there. And if we were to cut across that AR and imagine it was a terrestrial river, it would be as much water vapor moving along as 25 Mississippi rivers dumps into the Gulf of Mexico. It's a massive amount of water vapor, and that's why it can produce so much rain and snow. Go ahead. Now we see zoomed in a bit on California. It's the National Weather Service product. You see the colorful dots there. That's the rain gauge data, and the green and blues in the north and south are really light rain, and the reds and oranges and yellows in there are really heavy rain for 24 hours, up to 8 inches or more in 24 hours in key areas. I just want to point out the alignment of where the AR hit and where the heavy precipitation hits. This is one of the findings from our research over the last 10 years or so, and it's really, we see this time and time again. And the main point here is to understand that to get the AR, to get the heavy precipitation right, which matters to FURO, get it right in the forecast, we have to get the atmospheric river right, period. Go ahead. What does an AR look like in a satellite image? It's a beautiful comet cloud, we call it. Go ahead. But the AR is sort of hidden from view from normal satellite data. And here we have it outlined in red, just schematically. And the main thing I want to point out is in the next 24 hours after this, that AR moves eastward largely. This comet cloud moves northeastward, and the storm can be intensifying or decaying. Go ahead. So just schematically, I didn't move the satellite image, but the satellite image would change, and you'd see the AR move onshore. And the details of where it's going to hit and how impactful it is depends on a lot of technical parameters. And we boiled that down to a simple diagram. Go ahead. This is where we are working to show in a very concise way the colored dots on the coast where the AR is most likely to be strongest. And this is using our AR scale, which we developed under support from DWR and the AR program. Thank you very much, Director Namath and others for that support and for much of the support behind a lot of what I'm showing here. You see the orange dots in the Bay Area. That's basically allowing us to see, oh, that's where the AR is going to be strongest and last longest, and therefore the impacts are likely to be greatest. Go ahead. Sometimes the media catches on to that. This is a storm from a couple of years ago. Go ahead. And I think I'm going to get behind a bit, so I'm just going to jump through this, just skip through this. Go ahead. Keep going. This is a good one. So this is a way to visualize the forecast over the next 2 weeks. From the right-hand part of that left-hand diagram, go left, and that's 16 days into the future. Each one of those boxed areas is a different AR in the forecast, where the landfall date is highlighted in the little text box. That's 5 very substantial ARs lined up to hit California over about a 10-day period. This is what we call the onslaught of ARs of 2023. I have not seen this sort of thing historically very much. They happen. We just haven't had the tools to see them like this. This was in real time. And these data were able to help us anticipate a very active period that was coming in. And I won't go into too much more detail on this diagram, but it's an illustration of the kind of role the science has had in producing products that are now available for people such as water managers and emergency managers and National Weather Service forecasters and DWR specialists to be able to look at. Go ahead. For example, that tool is shown on the California Water Watch webpage of DWR. Go ahead. As is the landfall position or landfall tool for the dot diagram there. That, by the way, is the equivalent of what, if you've heard of it, the hurricane cone of uncertainty and their forecast of hurricanes for elsewhere in the country. This is our version of that for ARs. Go ahead. National Weather Service regularly uses and refers to the information we're generating at our center, and you can see an example here. Go ahead. This is going to be too technical. Go ahead. This one I'll hit on. That last slide was basically showing a weather model we've invented that's tailored to ARs. And the thing is it accurate? Well, we've looked at the accuracy. It's the best, it's the most accurate model to predict atmospheric rivers that exists. And this is a measure of that skill. The vertical axis is the root mean square error. So like the error in the forecast, and the time on the bottom is our skill scores over evolving over a 7-year period since we started the center, essentially. And the fact those lines are dipping down to the right substantially, that's the quantitative evidence of our improvement in forecast skill. We're basically helping the forecasts at 5 days now be as accurate as they were a few years ago at 3 days or even 2 days. That kind of improvement in skill and lead time is a major advance in meteorology. Go ahead. I'll emphasize, keep going. One more thing, that this essentially is the research into operations kind of thing, because these model output then are used in many cases for individuals and forecasters to get a sense of what's coming. Go ahead. Another thing we're doing is artificial intelligence improvements, and this is a horizontal axis is the lead time out to 7 days, which is 160 hours. Once again, the lower the position on the graph, the better the forecast skill. That black arrow highlights that we have invented a way with AI to improve the forecast by another 5 to 20% on top of adding the new data and having a best model. Go ahead. Go ahead. Another thing we're doing is running the model 200 times a day in the winter. The best the National Weather Service does is 30 times. The best the European Center, the best modeling center in the world does is 50 times. We have broken into whole new territory here. Go ahead. And this diagram, I just want to emphasize, each one of those little rows is a different forecast issued at the same time with slight changes to the forecast initial conditions. That's the old butterfly effect, if you've heard of it, where the forecasts are very dependent on small errors in temperature, wind, pressure, and moisture in the initial state, largely offshore. And this allows us to quantify the chance of a really extreme event coming, even though most of the odds are a moderate to weak event. Go ahead. Let's go ahead. This is going to be too technical. Go ahead. One more. All right, this one I want to highlight. So this is the observed case of precipitation, observed precipitation, that storm I highlighted at the beginning. Go ahead. This is what it looked like from the European model. That difference between the deep red and purple and the pinks in that other diagram are substantially under forecast of this major storm. Go ahead. This is the US model. Once again, even more under predicted. Go ahead. How did our weather model do? This is our ensemble, the special model we have. I mentioned that large area of red helps us see there's much better forecast in this case. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. This is another diagram. I won't go into too much detail, but the fact that blue line and green lines are lower than the red and purple lines, that's where our model is another example of how it's doing better. And when we do the machine learning on the top of that, the purple line or the red line is our model. The purple is with the machine learning or AI. Go ahead. Same sort of thing for different, even more extreme precip. Go ahead. And I should mention, folks on the call here largely, of course, aren't meteorologists, and it's hard to know, are these significant changes in skill? I can tell you after 30 years of working in meteorology, these essentially are a form of breakthrough that now the rest of the country is hoping that we can apply our methods to help elsewhere and help the National Weather Service do better than the rest of the country. These are big changes. Go ahead. One more. This is going to be way too complicated. Go to the and one more. I just want to point out that the snow level in these storms is super important. And we have errors in predicting how high in the mountains you have to go before the rain turns to snow. If the storm is very warm, you get rain all the way up in the watershed, high up, and you get a bigger flood. If you have a cold storm, of course, it's more snow and it melts more slowly and the flood risk is greatly reduced. This complicated set of diagrams really boils down to just 1,000-foot or 350-meter error in the prediction of the altitude of the snow level, the altitude above which this precipitation will fall as snow, causes in some altitude ranges a very substantial uncertainty in the runoff. And this is another area of work that FIRO has helped stimulate, and we have made some headway on this as well. Go ahead. I'll skip that one. Go ahead. I'm aware of the time here. I want to highlight this last bit here is when we look at the Feather and Yuba systems, the New Bullards Bar and the Yuba River and Oroville and the Feather. One key question is, how long does it take to release extra water if it were stored behind the dam? And this is what the technical studies have shown. Go ahead, under FIRO. This is an example of one of the diagrams from our FIRO diagnostic work and study. Is we have the elevation of Oroville Dam there, storage in the blue line. And that first blue arrow shows that There's extra storage ahead of the storm as a potential for, having extra water available in the summer. And then you see the blue line dips down. That's because in this study of the big storm, I think this was 97, that there was 4 days to release that FIRO pool of flexible space that we've been studying. And that allowed us to have, in this study, looking back at the big 97 event, we did it the 1986 one too, that with 4 days lead time, we could get that water out of the way before the storm. Go ahead. But then that water has to travel downstream to get past the flood control points downstream. And water's flowing real fast in a storm like this. It only takes half a day or a day for that water to get past the serious flood control points that are part of the design work. So go ahead. What that means is 4 days to release the FIRO pool, plus a half a day to a day for travel time for that water to the back edge of that water to get past the flood risk spot downstream. And the bottom line is accurate 5-day forecasts are needed to make FIRO work. And that's essentially what our FIRO study has shown. The preliminary results are encouraging in this way. And let me sum up where we're at right now. Go ahead, one more. So this is our sort of bullet summary of where we're at with the final viability assessment nearing its closure. The outputs are supporting the Corps' update of the water control manuals for both reservoirs. And this is factoring in, and you'll hear more from Jenny about that. The management strategies for New Bullards Bar and Oroville explicitly leverage forecast decisions, forecasts in the decisions. And we use an established approach that's already been implemented at Folsom for a few years, and also experimental approaches that show even more new forecast types can more fully exploit the FIRO concept. Systems operations between the two dams remains a challenge to quantify, but it needs to be done to partly to accommodate uncertainty in side inflows below each dam. And we're going to do final assessment of potential benefits to downstream locations. One of the challenges this program has revealed is that the ResSim, the standard software package the Corps has used to evaluate water control manual changes, has not been designed to use forecasts. And we've been able to use it in some ways that have been very helpful, but there are other aspects like this system thing where it isn't really, with the forecasting, been able to be up to the task. And then, as I mentioned, we've emphasized evaluating the potential operations with scaled up versions of the 86 and 97 storms. Go ahead. And this is the last slide. I just want to go ahead one more. I'll give my thank you and contact info on there. This is, if you want a non-technical, non-jargony summary of how a lot of this is working, please take a look at this Scientific American article where the editor who helped me write it was very helpful in making it in common language and all. And it sort of tells in a very brief read the story of what I just described in more detail here. Thank you very much.
Marty, thank you very much. We're going to move into specific questions that commissioners may have. Let me just share that I've been really impressed with the science that you and your colleagues have been able to produce. And as a non-expert and a generalist, I just want to share for commissioners that this science played a really important role during last winter's flooding. And those maps and that data that Marty showed actually helped us across state government and federal government understand the size, the location, the timing of these huge storms. And then combined with data from our Flood Operations Center, which is jointly run by DWR and our federal agencies, we were able to pre-position equipment and personnel and provide emergency notice to those areas of the state that we anticipated flooding based on our knowledge of those atmospheric rivers coming from the science. So lest you think that this is sort of an academic exercise, this information and data is actually translating into keeping people safer. And Marty, you talk about, you ended your presentation with explaining that this science might also, well, it will also inform the Army Corps' update of its flood control manual and hopefully enable us or the Army Corps to operate the reservoir. So first and foremost, to keep people safe from flooding, and of course, to optimize it for other uses, including the storage. And I'll note that FERO has been effectively applied. You mentioned Folsom. There's also Lake Mendocino. This is actually working, and we're really excited that the science is going to help inform the update of the flood control manual. Before we turn to questions, Carla, you've educated me on a lot of the things that Marty just mentioned and are putting this into use. Any high-level thoughts you have about FERO and how it can inform our discussion today?
I'll just maybe put an exclamation point on some of the work that Dr. Ralph did, and that is, in a certain sense, while there was, loss of life in 2023 in parts of the state, given the storm events, many of those storms, because of the ways in which we were able to respond and deploy this technology, was really a gift. And as Dr. Ralph educated me, we learned in, a 3 to 6 week period what would take us about 8 years to learn ordinarily. And that's so important, to be ready, even if we don't have all the answers, to be ready when we get these storm events. And that's really why, with the governor's support and the legislature's support, the department is really all in partnership with Dr. Ralph and his team at Scripps, and broader partnerships that we have with the Desert Research Institute and NOAA and NASA to do everything we can to have better information, to make better decisions sooner. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla. Recognizing that Dr. Ralph is available for any offline discussions, are there any questions or points of clarification that commissioners want to ask about his presentation and how it might inform our next presentation from Jennifer at the Army Corps? And I'll turn it to Lori, our colleague from the Governor's Office of Emergency Services.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to underscore what you said to the group from the emergency management aspect in 2023. This information was helped us to pre-position resources, and when we can get like swiftwater rescue and fire engines and even evacuation, mutual aid in the right place at the right time, based off of this, science, it does save lives. We can get people out of harm's way faster. We can get help to people who are stuck faster. We made a lot of rescues, and we're able to get to people before the flooding overtook them. So I just want to say thank you to the doctor. And this is the second time I've heard your presentation. I'm really hoping I can get a copy of the slides so that I can share those with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, and sure thing.
Thanks so much, Lori. Other members of the commission that have a question or comment? Mayor Pittman. I see your hand up, but you're still muted. And James, we just want to make sure that the mayor is able to unmute.
Yeah, he has the ability to unmute, but he's currently muted.
Oh.
We still can't hear you, Mayor Pittman. You may need to select the correct input microphone. Down by the mute button, there's a little arrow that points up, and you can select the correct microphone for your input.
Is that working now?
It is.
Okay, thank you, sir. I certainly appreciate the presentation, and I really love to hear him talk about the 97 event, as I was evacuation coordinator here for our city during that time, and that information was extremely valuable. I think that his work just emphasizes our current application for more funding to rebuild our levee along the Oroville, because that levee was put in 1913 and really hasn't had anything significantly done to it since then. So we're all looking to prepare for the future, and the doctor's words give us hope to be able to better manage the process. But one thing about our particular levee, we actually have some critical infrastructure buried in that. The fiber optic line that feeds the West Coast data terminals actually runs through this levee. It is buried in that. So his presentation really emphasizes the need for all of us to prepare all our levees for the future and give us some predictable volumes of water that we'll have. And I appreciate that information. It was a wonderful presentation. Again, I would love to have a copy of that too, to share with my local folks.
Thanks so much, Mayor Pittman. Commissioner Marin.
Good morning. Just a real quick question, Dr. Ralph. I just wanted clarification on your program here for Faro. Are you, the way I got your presentation is, you're collaborating pretty much all the European models, the GFS models, all that, and you're computing it into your system and it's reading out. So now, is that the gist of it I'm getting?
Yes, we do incorporate the European model forecast as what we call boundary conditions and initial conditions, and also the US model. The AR recon data I mentioned is going into all the global models. It's shared, for everybody's benefit. And then our specialized model we have developed uses those international models, the GFS from NOAA and the European model, to help start the model running each time.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. It really, like I said, this past winter, I was jumping around from all models as well as down Scripps models, and as well, everyone knows Yuba County's suffered floods in '86 and '97. I was here for all of those, so it's great to see that something's collaborating together. And it's just, I just have to go to one system now instead of watching 6 different systems and models. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oscar. Mr. Ross from Senator Dolly's office.
Yeah, just and again, I'd echo the thanks of I mean, in terms of emergency preparedness for winter events, this is amazing. So thanks for your work on this. In terms of reservoir operations, on a very big picture level, and I'm sure when you start getting into the further presentations might go into this, but I mean, is the idea that, hey, we could push storage limits in the winter safely and maintain higher storage levels with the idea that when we can see a big storm coming, we'll be able to safely release some water.
Sorry, I interrupted.
I hit the end of my question. I just didn't put a question on it.
Yeah, that's exactly the scenario that we have tested most, and it looks very promising.
Thank you.
And Marty, I'll just confirm too that ultimately this is a great segue actually to Jennifer's presentation from the Army Corps. At the end of the day, as I understand it, priority 1A, which is non-negotiable, is always going to be flood safety and protecting the community. And so, as we evaluate and incorporate science, or make the case to Army Corps to incorporate science in the flood control manual, we need to continue to explain that, because safety will never be compromised for reservoir storage. There may very well be ways to optimize for better for both, but of course safety is always priority 1A.
If I could just add to that, absolutely, and that's the fundamental thing we worked on in this FARO study for Oroville, was to ensure that not only the current amount of flood risk mitigation is maintained, but explored the possibility of even enhancing that.
Yeah, thank you. Supervisor Connolly.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, for reiterating what our concerns are. During the presentation, that was not emphasized. I appreciate that Marty Ralph is the expert, that we made huge improvements. But again, it seems like the priority of DWR and our neighbors to the south is water delivery. And we want to reemphasize that safety is so very important. Also, I think civilian input might be needed. I think I did hear one thing, that you really improved everything over 7 years. Well, I'm 70 years old, and I don't know how old you are, Marty, but what if there's a 25 But what if there's a 25-year event? So what we're looking at from our perspective is that delivering water is important, but public safety, again, is more important. And a mistake made with this new forecast could be more devastating especially with no second spillway at Oroville and so forth, because you'll be overwhelmed and we'll be overwhelmed. So I'm happy. I really believe that we have a voice now, and as we develop it, I hope you'll listen to us. But thank you again for backing up the safety part of it towards the end. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Supervisor Connolly. And I think this is a really good segue to the Army Corps presentation. And again, to emphasize, Dr. Ralph and his colleagues are providing information and data, ultimately not the decision makers of how the reservoir is managed. And in this case, ultimately and legally and realistically, it's the Army Corps whose statutory responsibility is protecting us from flood. So with that, I'm going to turn the gavel over to Director Namath to facilitate from here. I'm going to be on until 11 o'clock, and then I'll turn it over to Jennifer Fromm from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to give us an update on the flood control manual update. And I would say, Jennifer, given Supervisor Connolly's comment, if you can just emphasize where there are opportunities for the public as well as local elected officials to figure in to the update process, that'll be really helpful.
Thank you, Secretary. So we are moving on to item 3, our water control manual update and the development process. I do, Supervisor Connolly, also want to respond to your comment that flood safety is the first priority of the department. It's not water deliveries south. We don't operate our system that way. Lots of discussion, I think, is needed over the course of the development of the water control manuals update. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Fromm. Thank you.
Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenny Fromm, and I'm the Chief of the Water Management Section at the Sacramento District at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And I also am serving as the technical lead for both the New Bullards Bar and Oroville Water Control Manual updates. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to talk about a couple of things. So the water control manual update process, the objectives for the New Bullards Bar and Oroville water control manual updates, FERO pilot program and water control manual updates alignment, and the water control manual updates schedule. Next slide, please. So here's a really simple layout of the water control manual updates process. It's a lot more complicated than this, but it kind of takes you through some high points. So it approximately takes 4 to 5 years to get a water control manual updated. Next slide, please. So the first step in the process is to prepare the management documents, because the Corps has a process about how to manage projects. So that would be preparing the project management plan, or PMP. And that will really detail the quality delivery specific procedures, as well as what type of project this is going to be. There's also an additional management plan that will be created called the Hydrologic Engineering and Management Plan, or HEMP. And that essentially is describing the technical outline of all the hydrologic engineering studies necessary to formulate a solution to the water resources problem, in this case, a water control manual update, and details specific technical activities that would be conducted during that process. Next slide, please. So throughout the process, there will be public and stakeholder outreach, and I'll talk more about that specifically for these 2 water control manual updates when we start looking at the schedule. But essentially, there will be public engagement and stakeholder engagement throughout the process, and that way people have an opportunity to provide comment and feedback for what the alternatives might be, and also to the process itself. Next slide, please. So another thing that we update is the hydrology. So the last time Oroville's water control manual was updated was 1970. There's a lot more detailed data on, the period of record about what has happened in those last 30 plus years. Also, like Marty discussed, the technology has increased on how we're forecasting. So we're updating the hydrology, including some synthetic events, so we can test these alternatives, so we can see if this will work given the information we have. The next slide, please. So another thing we're going to be doing is modeling existing conditions. So in order to know if a specific alternative for the water control plan is going to work, we need to be able to test it against the existing conditions, because we do not want to make anything worse than what currently exists. And as we've talked about today, safety is our first priority. Next slide, please. And then the next part of the process is developing those alternatives. Like, what are we going to be evaluating for the water control plan in order to incorporate forecast? And I'll talk more about that when we get to the schedule and the alignment with the FURO program, specifically about Oroville and New Bullards Bar. Next slide, please. And then another aspect we have to consider is doing the environmental effects analysis. So this is the NEPA process. The water control manuals are a federal core product, so therefore it's a federal action. So NEPA is needed in order to complete this. And unfortunately, we can't say all water control manuals use this type of NEPA analysis. So we have to know a general idea enough so we can start testing the alternatives about what we're going to be looking at before we start the NEPA process. And depending on what that is, there's different types of NEPA processes and they have different schedules. Next slide, please. And then come the reviews. This is very important as well. You're reviewing your NEPA documentation, the engineering report detailing all the information we talked about that we were going to do in the HIMP. We're going to go through ATR, that stands for Agency Technical Review. So that is folks within the Corps of Engineers that are outside Sacramento District reviewing the process and the documentations and the modeling to confirm that it's quality product. Then we have an IEPR, which is an external review that includes the partner review with DWR as well as Yuba Water Agency. And then we have a final product of a water control manual. Next slide, please. And then the final review and approval process. This is when the water control manuals will go to division. It will go through policy review as well as legal compliance review. And then when it is approved and signed, it will be signed by the division commander at South Pacific Division, which is the division that we have. Next slide, please. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the objectives for the water control manual. So since, these are both for New Bullards Bar and Oroville, since both projects, and sometimes when I say projects, I mean the dam itself. So in this case, that's the dam itself. They share a control point. So their combined system operations needs to be considered. So this is also why these two projects, water control manuals, are being updated at the same time. And these objectives were determined by both the Corps, DWR, and Yuba Water Agency. And the objectives are essentially the items that need to be met for each alternative to be considered in order to be, the approved water control plan. And I'm not going to read each one of these, but also want to note the yellow highlighted portions. Those are the ones that are in the existing water control manual at the time. The big thing to take away here is, both of these water control manuals that exist right now include Marysville Dam, which was authorized but never built. And so their operations take Marysville into account. So with this updated water control plan, we're going to remove the necessity for Marysville Dam. And then also each individual agency, Yuba Water Agency and DWR, had some other items that they wanted to consider specific to the objectives of the water control diagram. Next slide, please. And then there's also some additional objectives for the Emergency Spillway Release Diagram, or ESRD. And essentially this diagram is associated with operating the spillway gates, and it's used for dam safety purposes with the goal of not overtopping the dam. And it uses the probable maximum flood, or PMF, and that's the current design flood event used to prevent failure of dams, and is the flood that may be expected from the most severe combination of critical meteorology and hydrology conditions that are reasonably possible in the drainage area. And each agency's specific objectives for routing the PMF with a specific amount of space between the maximum storage when routing that PMF and the top of the dam is listed here. So when we're routing the water control plan and we're looking at the freeboard, because that's that space in between the maximum storage and the top of the dam, we're double checking it against these requirements that Yuba Water Agency and DWR has set. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we've done with the water control manual update and the FURO pilot program is this is the first time that the FURO program and the water control manual update program are being done in parallel. So a lot of things we're learning. And one of the things that we did is, my computer is saying, oh, okay, I think I can snooze it because it's saying it might restart, but in case I disappear, I will come back. So we wanted to, get together. We held a series of workshops between the FURO team and the Water Control Manual Update team in order to accomplish a couple of things. One, to not duplicate efforts, and two, to really educate each other, because a lot of the folks that were involved in the FURO program have not been involved with the Water Control Manual Update, and vice versa, and to also understand the goals of each project. So from this workshop, we created a list of common tasks between efforts, and you see this list here. And note there's a green check mark for items that are complete, a yellow clock for items that are in progress, and a black circle for items that are not started yet. So essentially defining the flood operations objectives and performance metrics. We just talked about the objectives in the couple of slides beforehand. Define alternative development strategy. We have completed those. We're defining the existing condition to compare with alternatives. We're very close to completion with that. And we prepared the hydrology, updating the last 30 plus years since the manual was last updated. We are close to completion on that. We're also close to completion on developing the models and tools and conducting our basic performance evaluation. Things we still have left to do, and I'll talk more about that when we look at the schedule as well, is develop the system operations for promising alternatives, conduct additional evaluation for promising alternatives, and identify the selected alternative to be put into the updated water control manual. Next slide, please. So one thing we also did during these workshops is set up a system where we have teams, and each team is represented by folks on the FURO team as well as folks on the water control manual team. So that way, there's a ton of communication going on. There's input from both the water control manual team and the FURO team being involved in the process. And this really, I think, set the foundation on what made this project so successful. We're not done yet, but I still consider us successful. And those 9 teams are communication. We want to be able to tell our story about what we're doing. Forecast verification, observation, meteorology, hydrology, water resources engineering, and that's where the meat and the potatoes are happening with the, determining what the alternatives might be. The leadership team, making sure we're all headed in the right direction, looking at economic benefits, and the decision support tools. So this is important. So if we're going to be using a water control manual that has a model-based approach to its operations, we want to have a tool that works. And so when the water control manual gets signed, we can use that tool and we're ready to go. Next slide, please. So Marty briefly touched on this slide earlier today, but I just want to walk through his portions really quick, and then I'll dive deeper more into the schedule. So Yuba Water Agency is planning on constructing a secondary spillway, what they're calling an ARC spillway, and that is the timeline at the blue at the top. The FURO pilot program that Marty discussed, that is the green schedule. And then the water control manual update schedule is in the teal below the dates. And then the DSS tool, the data support system tool that I discussed recently, is in the orange. So things I want you to take away from this is, where are we in the process right now, and where can you get involved? So where are we in the process right now? In August of 2023, so earlier this year, the FURO team handed over alternatives for the at-site operations for both New Bullards Bar and Oroville. And when I say at-site operations, that's specifically talking about how each individual project is going to operate in these recommended alternatives. And the water control manual team has taken these recommended alternatives, reviewed them, and determined what additional questions we have and where we need additional clarification and refinement. So during the next couple of months, the water control manual update team, which is the core, will be refining these alternatives and determining which alternatives are promising and will be used in evaluation. So in late spring 2024, we will have them to the point of finalization, not final, but to the point where we can say, like, these are the alternatives we want to evaluate from a NEPA perspective. And so that will help determine what type of NEPA analysis is needed. And, as I stated before, unfortunately, you can't say, when you have a water control manual, update it to this type of NEPA analysis. So we have to have an idea about what we're going to be evaluating before we can determine the type of NEPA analysis. And essentially that dictates the schedule. So if it's an environmental impact assessment, which is an EIS, or an environmental assessment, which is an EA, those have two different schedules. And again, I'm not a NEPA professional, so if you have questions about that, I will just write them down and we'll get them answered for you later. So essentially, like, how can you get involved in the process? So first of all, if you have any questions at any time, please send them to the folks in this forum. They can pass them along to me, and we can get those questions answered for you. And then also during the NEPA scoping process, and then throughout the NEPA process, there will be opportunities for public and stakeholder engagement. And as we get closer to that time frame, I can pass along additional information, so that way you're fully informed about where you can get involved. But like I said, at any time, feel free to ask questions. So ultimately, the goal is to have two, because there'll be one water control manual for New Bullers Bar and one water control manual for Oroville, to have two completed, fully implemented water control manuals by late 2026. So with that, I am available for questions, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Fromm. I think we'll start by opening it up to various commissioners. Do you have questions or comments on Ms. Fromm's presentation?
So
Robert, you're still on mute. If you could unmute yourself if you're meaning to talk.
on mute. Yeah, I'm on mute now. Am I unmuted now?
Yeah, you're fine, Robert.
Okay, well, over the last month or two, we've been working on with a group of people on how to look at the water control manual process. And we have a couple of concerns, many of which have been addressed at the presentations this morning, which were very good. One is that we felt that the process was advancing without sufficient community input. And I'm not sure that's true, but we've searched around and we can't find anyone from the community who has been socially involved. And we'd like to know how that can be addressed. And secondly, we circulated a list of objectives, and we have no idea how to get those into the process and how they could be debated and whether they're all reasonable, but they all appeared to be. And thirdly, as Bill said, we are concerned that the process will end up focusing on the increase of water supply rather than on public safety and minimizing risk downstream. And very happy to hear that that's not necessarily anyone's idea, but that we tend to get that impression. And most of the presentation this morning answered a lot of our questions, but I think we would like to know how we can enter the discussion about the objectives, and secondly, how we get involved with people who are dealing with this process. Thank you.
Any other signatories to that? We all should have gotten the small groups sort of assessment of issues they would like to raise as part of the water control manual process. I don't know, Supervisor Connolly, if you wanted to add to Mr. Bateman's comments now before we ask Ms. Fromm to respond.
Yes, I'd like to point out that in 30th of May 2016, it was said that it's a 5-2 public participation in water control development revisions promotes open communications and all this, and it went on. But now we're in the process of the water control manual being created, and it seems like the public comment has been reserved from the NEPA process. So there are people that are much better at engineering backgrounds and so forth, but they're civilians and they would like to take part in this. And again, emphasizing public safety, and you've alluded a lot of our concerns there, alluded to our concerns, but we are up in 2023, 1, 2, 3, 4 years, and there hasn't been public meetings. That, in other words, you're preparing a manual and you go to a NEPA and CEQA, and then we get to comment. And so there's a gap, and it's in the publications from the Army Corps that they would have these meetings. And I'm relaying concerns of people that much more want to be involved than I am. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Smith?
Yes, thank you. I've enjoyed both the presentations, very informative. As a matter of learning and discovering new things, recently it was brought to attention at City Council, our levee that protects essentially from the diversion pool, which you can see right behind me here on my little image, a much beloved area to recreate here in downtown Oroville, of course. But from essentially the diversion pool down to where Riverbend Park is, that levee is described now as an orphan levee, which was a little bit surprising to me, given, you know, the building out of the State Water Project and, you know, all the mechanics and details behind how that exactly came to be, as above my, you know, local knowledge, coming to the community in the last decade. That being said, recently, DWR purchased a big strip of land and taking that property out of our tax base here locally in Oroville from the hatchery, which is right there across from where you can see on that image, down to Highway 70. And then, of course, a lot of environmental work was done, which big heavy equipment running up and down the river, putting in gravel, of course, you know, for the fish, and which is great. And the fish were really happy this year. That was the report, which is good news. But kind of my question, or as I'm just processing a lot of these changes with DWR acquiring more property in the downtown region of Oroville, a lot of this heavy equipment and activity, and then we're kind of told indirectly, but that orphan levy, that's your concern, that's not ours. And so, you know, as I'm listening to these, you know, the manuals being drafted, you know, is that new activity, and is all of that being taken into consideration? And then the rock that's being, thousands of yards of rock is being added to the river, which essentially can back up water, which can put pressure on our levee, our orphan levee. And then those rocks become projectiles that can destroy, and have in the past destroyed, Riverbend Park when there are unforeseen releases. And, you know, back to the comment about the NOAA and all the good work, and, you know, the forecasts are certainly much better. But for an example, this week we were supposed to have the beginning of an atmospheric river, and then it didn't materialize. And so here we are, you know, hoping for rain. But the opposite could be true. So while we're getting a lot better with where we are, you know, we still have a ways to go. And so, you know, just thinking in terms of, again, where the focus seems to be on water delivery, you know, but my responsibility, you know, is certainly safety of Oroville and the consideration of our citizens. And so to end my comments, you know, are we taking into consideration new purchases by DWR in our local community, and these huge environmental projects, multi-million-dollar environmental projects, and then what kind of impacts do they have to the to how water flows through the misnomered low flow channel? That's what it's called through downtown Oroville, but it's anything when it comes to low flow during those big releases. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Vice Mayor. And maybe what I'll do is ask Ms. Fromm to respond to, I think we do have a set of comments around the process with the water control manual. And then after that, I would ask Ted Craddock, our State Water Project Deputy Director, to talk a little bit about the recent purchase of that property near the hatchery, and talk about why that's happening and where that is in process. Mr. Marin, is that okay with you, or do you need to would you like to get a comment in before we transition back to Ms. Fromm?
Just one quick question. I just wanted to make sure I asked Ms. Fromm. what is the datum going to be used in this water manual? If it's going to be transferring, if it's new, if she has an answer, if not, then I just want to know, just because we ran into an issue last year with the wrong datum that the California River Exchanges has in Puerto River put us in a danger zone when we weren't even in a danger zone because they're going off of old datum. That's all.
Ms. Fromm, over to you.
Yes, so I wrote down most of the questions, but if I missed any, let me know. So regarding public comment and public meetings, those are a part of the NEPA process. And essentially, like, we need to know like what we're thinking about having as the alternatives in order to communicate that to others before, you know, it's available for comment on that. And like I said, like, any questions you have, feel free to send those along and we'll definitely answer those. Another thing too, earlier, don't quote me on the year, in the process, we did meet with the county OES folks, the reclamation districts, Caltrans, and other agencies to get an idea of, like, from their perspective, what flows you see out of both reservoirs that you see are beneficial, what flow and what levels, and what could potentially are causing some damage or causing some issues. So we did get that information, and in order to help inform like where we might, you know, put the release schedule, etc. So that was one of the comments. Objectives, how do you get involved with the process? You know, I can give you some more information about that in the future once we get an idea on what we're looking at. And then really the ultimate goal with the water control manual updates is flood risk management. And so we're looking at these alternatives from that perspective. There may be some secondary benefits of water supply, but the ultimate goal of them is flood risk management. And then when it comes to the datum that's being used, per our regulations, we're supposed to be using NAVD 88, and that is the current plan for updating both of these manuals. So that is all I have, unless I missed something.
So Ms. Fromm, two questions. One, can you discuss the ways in which the Corps is engaging downstream local flood control districts in your process, and are you working with them at this time to get to potential proposed approaches? That's question one. And then question two, can you give the commissioners and the community more of a sense of when the public engagement process will open?
Yes. Yeah. So we have been involved with the local flood control districts in talking about those workshops we held. I want to say it was 2022, just to get an idea of like where they're seeing potential issues, what flows they experience, overtopping, or other things that they see in their areas. So they're aware that the water control manual update is happening. They also are aware that it's in concurrence with the FURO program. So this is not your traditional way that we're updating a water control manual. So, and that just basically comes from a scheduling perspective, where the research to operations that Marty talked about is happening first, and we're involved with that process, and then we're following it with the water control manual. So it is a little different than before, but I'm available for questions at any time. And then your second question, I only wrote down half of it. Can you repeat it? Oh, when folks can get involved. Yes, my apologies. So I'm anticipating that'll be in the April, May, June timeframe of 2024. You know, we want to have an idea of what alternatives we're going to be looking at in the early spring, and then we'll start communicating once we figure out what that looks like. So, and before, we need to know what the plans are in order to communicate what they are, in order to get feedback from what those plans are. So that's what I'm thinking, late spring, early summer.
So that sounds like folks at Kearns and West, potentially a pretty intense topic for our next scheduled meeting. And I think we'll want to make sure that our timing is such that we can have that discussion here at the Oroville Citizens Advisory Commission meeting in advance of, I think, that truly getting underway. And then in the interim, Ms. Fromm, are you the point of contact at the Corps if folks have any additional questions?
I would be, but the easiest way would probably be to send it to our public affairs office, just because that way I will see it, it won't get lost in my inbox, and that way you can get response in a timely manner. So we can, if you can, maybe provide that information in the chat, or we can ask Kearns and West to, you know, after our meeting today, make sure they have that information and send that specific address to all the commissioners. Yes, I will put that in the chat. Thank you.
May I comment? It's Robert Bateman.
Please.
If we get the address, that would be very useful. But the other question is, how do we get some sort of discussion going on the appropriate objectives for the water control manual from the point of view of the community? We listed, I think, at least 10 or 11, and whether they're all sensible or not, but there should be some process where the community combines in presenting objectives which are agreed by the community. Thank you.
Yes, you can send those to the same contact information for public affairs, and then I will get those, and we can set something up to have those conversations.
So we will talk to who we can and put together what we think are reasonable objectives and send them to your public affairs office.
Yes. And unfortunately, I don't see the chat. I only see Q&A, and I can't put anything in there, but I can put that somewhere.
Jennifer, if you send it to us, we can make sure that it gets out to everybody.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Ms. Fromm? Supervisor Connolly.
Thank you. I'm used to just pushing the bar and mute goes, so now I have to do it manually. I would like to thank you, Jennifer, for making that offer. And my point is never to attack any individual. We're all good people. And I think everybody involved here are good people. It's just that we have been impacted in ways directly from the operations in the past. And I feel it's my obligation to protect the public from anything like that in the future. The manual is very, very important to the safety and indeed the industry of this community and those downstream from it. So I never want anybody to think that I'm not approachable or I'm angry or I'm mad at anybody. I just have an objective to try to get across as a representative. And with that stated, I have to leave. I'm headed to CSAC. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed the scientific updates on the climate forecast. Although I did point out it might be a little premature to say it's great. It's good. And then I appreciate that, Jennifer, that you've opened up the Army Corps process to the public. Thank you to Director Carla. I think you're really open and good to work with. And where did he go? That main guy left. But anyway, tell him I said hi. See you later. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. And now Vice Mayor had particular questions on a newly acquired parcel. And if I could ask Ted Craddock, the Deputy Director for the State Water Project, to respond to Vice Mayor Smith's questions there.
Yeah, sure will. Thank you, Director, and thank you, Vice Mayor, for the questions. And I also appreciate your comments, just recognizing the importance of the Feather River fishery as a public resource that, you know, is important species, the salmon and the steelhead trout in the river, but also just for overall public benefit and enjoyment of those species, whether it's on the recreational side or from the species standpoint. Your specific question was, related to the property acquisition. Just for everybody's reference, there's a piece of property located immediately adjacent to the Feather River Fish Hatchery property, the property where the fish hatchery is located. And so as we look to the future, we're envisioning, additional efforts will need to be made to help support the salmon fishery in the Feather River. The last few years of drought have been extremely hard on the salmon fishery, not only on the Feather River, but statewide. And so there's important efforts that, will happen in the future to help the survival and longevity of the species in the long run. Some of those include modifications to the fish hatchery with potential enlargement. And so that property will be helpful for that. We currently use the portion of the property to access the backside of the hatchery, and then also to obtain access to the Feather River for the gravel work that you mentioned that, helps to improve the spawning conditions for the salmon. And there's other work planned in the future related to the ability to better identify the fall run and spring run salmon, and also, additional habitat creation for the benefit of the salmon and steelhead. In fact, there's I think a whole suite of work envisioned that, was both outlined in the Oroville relicensing settlement agreement and agreed to by the parties there, but other work that is planned just to continue to benefit the fishery. So Director, perhaps at a future meeting, it might be good to add this as a topic if it makes sense for the commissioner to be able to share what's planned for the future.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I think the Vice Mayor's question was a good one, and there's a lot more information and activity underway currently and or planned, and that could we could propose that as an agenda topic at a future commission meeting. But Vice Mayor Smith, questions, comments for Ted, others?
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you very much for also the rafting tours and supporting of that. I think moving forward as a community to generate buy-in and a sense of ownership, local ownership, especially with our kiddos and our public schools, is just a wonderful thing. And so I really appreciate DWR's commitment to public education and our environment, of course, the anadromous fish and all the activity that exists there. So I think into the future, more work can certainly be done in that respect. All things considered with our environment, from water deliveries to the fish to local safety. So again, I just want to say thank you, and I'm looking forward to greater partnerships to those endeavors, which I think benefits all of us as we look to the future with the next generation of passing the baton. Which at this stage in life, you start thinking about those things. So thank you, and thank you for addressing some of my concerns.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I think that we have probably advanced to what was item 4. Where's Tara and our Kearns and West support team, or James? So I think we've covered this topic, but I'll look to Commissioner Bateman to give us the thumbs up before we head on to our last item, item number 5, which is planning for winter operations. But Commissioner Bateman?
Yeah, we will follow up with suggestions to the Army Corps, and try and encourage as many people as possible to participate at this end. But all the presentations were very satisfactory, and thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, with that, James, we'll move on to item 5, and this is winter operations preparation. And I'd like to invite John Lehi from the Department of Water Resources to walk us through it. Take it away, John.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. Director Namath. Again, my name is John Lehi. I am the Assistant O&M Division Manager for Water Management Activities of the State Water Project. I'll be giving a recap of how the hydrology and operations played out this past winter, or this past year, and the planning for the upcoming winter. Next slide, please. So I want to begin with a recap of the hydrology we received in water year 2023. A much needed reprieve after 3 of the most severely dry years that we have experienced historically in California. Over 20 moderate to exceptional atmospheric rivers, including the specific New Year's Day AR that Dr. Marty Ralph highlighted, rolled through Northern California from December through March of this past winter. Much of the center of the state got blasted with record-breaking precipitation totals. The Feather River Basin received precipitation totals, although not record-breaking, significantly above normal. Next slide, please. So again, we saw a remarkable turnaround in the overall hydrologic conditions in the state. From much of the state was from entrenched in the extreme drought a year ago today, to almost the entire state now being removed from drought as of the beginning of water year 2024. Next slide, please. As a result of the heavy precipitation, we saw full recovery of Lake Oroville storage in the late spring of 2023. We are currently drafting storage now to meet Delta requirements. The State Water Project is partially responsible for meeting, and we are making fall deliveries to the local farmers. But we are still significantly better positioned going into water year 2024 storage-wise than we were a year ago today. We are currently releasing the minimum required to the Feather River so that storage can be conserved should the current dry conditions that we are experiencing continue into this winter. We're currently only about 30% of average precipitation-wise since October 1st, the beginning of the water year. We had 1.2 million acre feet more storage at the beginning of the current water year than the previous one. So that's, we're at approximately 2/3 full in the lake, which is about 134% of average for the state. Next slide, please. So here is a depiction of how Oroville storage in blue changed throughout the past year in relation to the allowable storage in red, per the existing wetness parameter that determines that allowable storage. If actual storage exceeds the allowable, then flood releases are required. As you can see, the allowable storage line varied with the flood space, depending on how wet the watershed conditions were at various times throughout the winter. So, for example, with the heavy rains in late December, January, and March, the maximum amount of flood space was required. I also want to draw your attention to the gray area in the flood pool. Vacating this space is not a requirement of the current flood control diagram, but represents the enhanced flood pool the DWR has been implementing in recent years. We have notified our partners that we intend to continue to implement the enhanced flood pool for this coming winter. Please note that the current storage below 2.4 million acre feet is well below even the enhanced flood pool going into the winter months. Next slide, please. So what does the current El Nino conditions portend for this coming winter? As a reminder, El Nino is a climatic condition where the sea surface temperatures in the Eastern Pacific are warmer than usual. And this condition typically means wetter tendencies for the Southwest or Southern California and drier conditions for the Northwest US. But what does it mean for Northern California and the Feather River Basin? The pie charts here illustrate the outcomes of past El Nino events since 1950. El Nino conditions typically drive the storm track farther south than an average winter. Southern California has a better predictability of precipitation than Northern California in El Nino winters. As you can see from the pie charts for Northern California, that there are fairly equal chances for wet or dry conditions in Northern California and the Sierra Nevada. So El Nino's take-home message here is that El Ninos have recorded anywhere from a very dry to very wet winters historically for Northern California. As a reminder, and this was part of Dr. Marty Ralph's presentation, our future water supply will depend on individual storms, which is what makes water management so challenging in the state. Next slide, please. So looking at the specific seasonal forecasts produced by NOAA, National Weather Service, we see that they are indeed forecasting slightly better odds of wetter conditions for much of the state, centered on that same I-80 corridor as we saw last winter. Coupled with the wetter conditions, we are also forecasting warmer than average temperatures statewide. Additional information on the status of various hydrologic parameters for the state are available on the California Water Watch website. Next slide, please. So in summary, much improved storage going into water year 2024. We continue to plan and prepare for not only extreme wet, but dry conditions. And so for dry conditions, we are currently releasing minimums required to conserve storage. And we will continue to employ the enhanced flood pool going into the coming winter. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Any commissioner questions for John? Okay, seeing none. Our last agenda item before we get to public comment. So there's a couple of feedback we need. One is feedback on the newly renovated action item tracker. So if you can provide comments by December 1st to that. And then we are also going to circulate proposed agenda by the 20th. So that's early next week, proposed agenda for our next meeting. And then we would request commissioner feedback on that agenda by December 15th. So I did hear a couple of good topics today. And so we do appreciate your feedback by the 15th for our first meeting of 2024. Any commissioner comments or questions on this? Okay. Let's move to public comment. So if you would like to make a comment, please click the raise hand button, and then I will call on you in the order you raised your hand. Each person will have 3 minutes to provide a comment. And after we have heard from all the verbal commenters, our meeting planner will read out any comments or questions submitted through the Q&A function. I do want to ensure that everyone who wants to has an opportunity to share at least once, but if we have time to make a second comment, we will do so. So if you have provided a verbal comment and submitted a written comment, we will also hold your written comment or question until after those submitted by others. So let's go ahead and transition. Do we have any raised hands for comments?
Carla, just a clarification. Yes,
Sure.
use the raise hand function within Zoom if you're connected, but those that have called in, press #2 to raise your hand if you'd like to make a public comment if you've dialed in. So
thank you.
please just raise your hand once and we'll allow you to unmute once you've been called on. I don't see any hands raised currently though, Carla. Oh, Michael Bissett just raised. So if you want to start calling names, or I can call them out, Carla, your call.
Why don't you go ahead and call them, James?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, Michael Bissett, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to make your public comment. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
How's that? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Well, good morning, Director Nemeth and members of the commission. My name is Michael Bissett. I'm the Executive Director for Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency. First of all, I wanted to thank the presenters today. I thought all the presentations were very informative, really enjoyed them. So thank you very much for those presentations. I just wanted to provide a quick update on 2 items related to this program. One is the City of Oroville levee repair. The city and Sabufka have entered into a services agreement. So the city has reached out to our agency to help provide technical assistance to evaluate their pretty much 1 mile orphan levee, as the Vice Mayor referenced it earlier. And to provide, once we've evaluated it in more detail than what has been done in the past, to advance design and permitting for the needed repairs. So we've also issued the first task order, or the city has, to our agency, and that task order is essentially to identify and pursue funding. So we did one thing to date. We've submitted to the Army Corps. They have a program for disadvantaged communities that have non-federally authorized levies. So we've submitted an application there, and that's essentially to initiate a feasibility study. So if the city is lucky enough to be selected, that process, as many folks here on the call know, could take at least 3 years to complete. And then the city would have to go and get a congressional authorization for the project and seek appropriations through Congress. So that's a long drawn out effort. That's our Plan B strategy. Plan A is to look for state funding. So I've been coordinating with Deputy Director Gary Lipner on possible funding opportunities within the state, and we'll continue to have those dialogues. So that's the update on the Oroville levee repair. The second item is the floodplain inundation mapping. So DWR was gracious enough to amend our planning contract for the Oroville Wildlife Area to add this additional function to do floodplain inundation mapping for the city of Oroville. And we have advanced those efforts. We will have draft maps available next month. And we're going to sit down with the mayor and some of the commissioners here who lived through the 97 event there in the city, so that we could show them what our modeling work looks like. And we can kind of true that up with their real life memory of that event. And once that's done and we kind of revise and update the mapping, we'll sit down with our DWR project managers to go over that information. So those are my 2 updates, and I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
The next person with their hands raised is Matt Mentik. Matt, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, Matt.
Hello?
Hello, Matt. We can hear you now.
Great, thank you. Lots of questions, but I think for most of them, I'm going to take Jenny up on her offer to submit that to Public Affairs and work up through a lot of these offline. But one question for you, Jenny. Did you receive a copy of what was labeled preliminary draft of downstream stakeholders' objectives?
Was that, I might have got sent that yesterday? Is that correct? Possibly.
Sure. We submitted it back in August.
Okay.
As agenda topic, so that it could help guide the presentation. I'm just wondering if we have an opportunity to improve communication between commissioners and the presenters of the meeting, so that we could have more bottom-up agendas going forward.
Matt, just your objectives document was shared with the presenters. So though I think the title was a little bit different, so that might have been confusing. But they did get that so that they could prepare and knew what you were thinking.
Yeah. In one of the first meetings that we had, when Joe Forbes was kind enough to join and pass out information, he really stated how important it was to bring us into the process at a very early stage, so that not only are we there for the environmental part, but downstream stakeholders who have gone through 3 incidents, the 86 flood, the 97, both levee failures, the failure of the spillway, could provide some perspectives from where we stand. And those things could help guide maybe fire objectives. We talk about trying to meet the 260,000 acre feet that Marysville is going to provide, but we still haven't heard what that looks like. One proposal was that's going to be reducing the objective flows at Marysville, so it's 3 feet lower in the levee. Both levee failures that we had were slouching that, in the locals' opinion, was caused from uncontrolled down ramping below Inglebright Dam. And that was another question that we wanted to talk about is, are we going to control the down ramping to avoid the levee slouching when we run our levees at full capacity? We wanted to question why the water that we give away, excuse me, that's the wrong term, the water that we try to save for increased water supply through the soil wetness index does not include snowpack. And there's been big studies that came out in the FIRO report, the viability report, that could be a big portion of your flood space could be consumed by misestimating your snowmelt. I think it was Brian Ham's report that did a great job on that. So we have a lot of these questions that we wanted to submit early enough so that we could take the hour and a half or so in this meeting to have it part of the presentation. And I think there's an opportunity for us to do that going forward. We'll start off by resubmitting those questions to you within the public affairs forum. So I'll pause there for now to see if there's other calls coming in, but I would like to ask Marty some questions, time permitting. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And Carla, if I could just jump in for 1 second, just so that everyone knows that the document that Matt and Commissioner Bateman drafted is posted on the Citizens Advisory Commission website. So it's available there for the public to check out as well. And we've been tracking the action items today with your suggested agenda topics. So we'll make sure those get in the queue.
Thank you, Tara.
There's currently no other hands raised.
So Matt, if you would like to present your questions to Dr. Ralph, or maybe actually before you do that, just to clarify, do we have any written comments or questions, Tara or James?
No, we don't.
Matt, questions for Dr. Ralph?
Starting off with a comment. I've had a chance to dive into a lot of the fire viability assessment report. I got to say that's excellent work. Your presentation demonstrated the quick advancement that's happening in AR and our understanding of it. My concern is, I think listed kind of in section or chapter 9 is how do we incorporate that into the water control manual? How do we use hindcast forecasting to find out how accurate were we? Were we 20% accurate on landfall, on freezing levels, on snow melt? And if so, if we were, or if our margin of error was 20%, then what's that mean for releases? We err on the side of flood, right, versus water supply, and we'd want to know how that factors into the curve and stuff. So your advice for us, for downstream citizens, let me introduce myself a little bit here. I sat through 3 years as a ad hoc member, the citizen representative for the Oroville Comprehensive Needs Assessment. And we spent a lot of time there discussing future infrastructure projects that could enhance resiliency, redundancy, and operations for climate change adaptability going forward, and to prevent the flood incidents that we had in the past. And we came up with 10 alternatives, and 7 of the 10 included a low-level outlet. So I sat through that. I was a 4-time evacuee, and family business took a big hit back in '86. So I've got a little bit of background when it comes to this. So for people like me who have lived through this in the community, how can we best track and follow the incorporation of all of the fibro viability information that was put out there, the new studies, the margin of errors, the accuracy rates, and that it is adequately incorporated into the water control manual? I know that the Army has to allow us in for public input during the environmental piece, but we really want to be involved in that piece of it as well too. Incorporating FIRO recommendations, accuracy rates of forecasting, so that we can feel good about using those skills on the side of future flood control for my kids, for my grandkids.
Well, thank you for that, Marty here. The last question there, I think, is a good one to start with, is really, I think, more in Jenny and your bailiwick about, in the water control manual update process. She did describe and show a chart of how we have coordinated, because the 2 efforts are somewhat in parallel this time. And we have work teams who are integrated together, working together to generate the connection you're talking about, and so at least at some level. I don't know, Jenny, if you want to add to that or correct anything.
I'll just add to, like, when the NEPA process starts, and when we start having the conversations about here are the alternatives we're going to be evaluating, that would also be the time to provide your feedback on the operations plan.
And then if I could share that in one of our other FIRO programs, where the final viability assessment was very favorable, and we had done some other work with the operators on a deviation, went very well. We are in the development team for FIRO, the research side of it has been added to the water control manual update team, so that we maintain that sort of connection and continuity through individual engagement and organizational engagement in a robust way. And I'm anticipating a similar alignment with Jenny and the Corps of Engineers as we go forward, as it's becoming an element of the process as we're inventing FIRO, essentially. And I'll add also that today I'm sitting in the offices of Orange County Water District, having a chance to join the commission meeting here, while our FIRO viability assessment for Prado Dam in Southern California is being finalized. Today is essentially the day we're finishing that up, and the results are very favorable. So we're in the process of figuring out how best to remain effective and engaged as the results of FIRO are considered fully in the water control manual update process. Jenny, any thoughts on that?
Just to go along with what you said, Marty, is like we're kind of building the train as we're driving it. That's a horrible analogy, but we have the water control manual update process. That's a set process based on our Army Corps regulations. but like how to incorporate FIRO, we're still trying to figure that out. So as we do that, we'll be communicating what that looks like. And like I said before, any questions at all, send them on their way and we'll get them answered for you. Over.
If I could add one more, thanks, Jenny. If I could add one more thing that just struck me as relevant here, is that the Corps of Engineers has created a new position that's filled by Joe Forbes as FIRO Integration Manager. And that's a position specifically intended to help ensure that connection is strong and to staff it in terms of a planning level of staffing to coordinate those things. So I've come to very much appreciate the Corps of Engineers forward leaning in on FIRO in FIRO evaluations in general, and in the water control manual update process as it's going forward, trying to figure out how best to incorporate FIRO. And once again, every dam is different. I'm a weather guy, I'm not a water resources expert, but I've come to think of dams as people. And just like in thinking, if you know one person, you know everybody. It's really unwise to think that even though, I feel like I know one dam well, it's unwise to think I know another one, even though it might look very similar to me. Over.
Thank you, Marty. And Matt, I think you really pose an interesting question about how we can communicate more effectively with communities about FIRO, generally speaking. I think what you're hearing today is that fundamentally FIRO, at least from the department's perspective, has been a technology that we wanted to deploy on with our flood control hats on, if you will. And that's why so much of it sits just really fundamentally with the Corps of Engineers. But I do think the department, with its broader flood control hat can think a little bit more deeply about how we communicate with communities around what FIRO is meant to do, how to be responsive to community concerns about risk management, in ways that are sort of better at information sharing more generally. Although I do understand that your specific comments are the necessity for our Oroville and surrounding communities to understand how FIRO feeds into this very specific water control manual process. And I think there's probably kind of two different paths that we can work down. One with obviously the Corps really front and center, and then I think separately the department can think a little bit more deeply about how to work ongoing communications around flood safety and FIRO, and that necessitates organization between the department and also local flood control agencies, so we all understand roles and responsibilities and how to interact more effectively with the public. But I do appreciate your comment.
Yeah, when I accepted that position as the citizen representative on Oroville's comprehensive needs assessment, I think that came with ownership of the results. And I've been very diligent and invest a lot of time to fulfill that ownership of results right on through the water control manual. So if we can develop those ways to keep us informed on how those two processes of the great work of FIROs gets integrated into the water control manual, accepting the objectives of downstream stakeholders, whether that's just using the public affairs department or looping it through the department or through Nancy Vogel. I think we need to put that on the tracking log and really follow up on that going forward.
You bet. Thank you.
Yeah.
James, other comments?
No other hands raised currently.
Okay, with that, I want to thank the members of the public for joining us here today and thank my fellow commissioners for a good discussion and certainly thank again our presenters. I think very valuable information. And Tara will be ensuring that commissioners have copies of those presentations. And of course, we do have a website where this information can also be made available to the public. And we look forward to commissioner feedback on our next agenda and seeing you in the new year. And just happy holidays to all of you moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.